Well, what does U.S. President Donald Trump want? What will he do? Well, those have become burning questions around the world as political leaders, diplomats, and policymakers trying to decipher the sometimes nebulous, many times contradictory messages coming from the White House. No place is as worried about this lack of clarity than right here in Europe. Well, earlier this week, U.S. Vice President Mike Pence, he tried to calm the jittery nerves of Americans' allies in the European Union and at NATO. Here is part of what he said about what President Trump expects NATO members to do.
The President of the United States and the American people expect our allies to keep their word and to do more in our common defense. If you're a nation that meets the 2% target, we need your help, encouraging other nations to do likewise. If you have a plan to get there, as he said, our alliance needs you to accelerate it. And if you don't yet have a plan, these are my words, not his, get one.
Get a plan. I'm joined now by Hans Kundnani. He is a research fellow at the Transatlantic Academy and the German Marshall Fund. Hans, we invited you on the program to talk about your newest paper on what the Donald Trump administration, what it means for German foreign policy. I mean, I've read your paper. It pulls no punches, and it could be politically explosive. You say basically that what Pence is saying is just the beginning.
I think so, and it seems to me as if this is not yet being taken seriously enough in Berlin. When I listen to what Merkel says, particularly when I listen, though, to what SPD politicians say, it feels as if they haven't quite yet grasped this is a completely different situation that we're in, particularly in relation to the question of defence spending, which the Vice President mentioned there. The idea that you can sort of continue this incremental increase of defence spending, as Germany has been doing for the last couple of years, I don't think it's going to be enough anymore. And I think this risks actually the future of NATO. Well,
the future of NATO and also maybe the future of how Germany sees itself.
Right.
But basically, you say Germany has been almost like a welfare queen, right? When it comes to economics, but also when it comes to security.
Yeah, there's a way in which it seems to me that, I mean, all Europeans depend on the United States and have free road, in a sense, on the United States. But it seems to me that Germany has, particularly in two ways. First of all, in terms of free riding on the US provision of security, because Germany spends relatively little on defence compared to France and the United Kingdom, for example. It's not a nuclear power in the way that they are. And then secondly, because of the structure of the German economy, this dependence on exports, it means that the German economy depends on external demand in a way that the British and the French economies don't. And so there's also an accusation of sort of economic free riding, that in particular in the last few years, as growth from the Eurozone periphery and then from China has slowed, that Germany has depended to a large extent on demand from the United States. So there's a sort of double free riding accusation.
Yeah, I want to show our audience something that you wrote, something from your paper, to help explain maybe what this free riding comment is. I mean, in your paper, you write that free riding in security terms has become a central part of Germany's sense of itself as a country. And then you go on to say, if worst came to worst, Germany would not seek an alternative to the U.S. security guarantee and would thus leave itself radically insecure in military terms. Now, what you're saying there is Germany is so addicted to the umbrella of America in security terms. If that umbrella were to close, Germany would still not do what is required to protect itself. So you're saying it would allow itself to be, what, vulnerable to Russia, to China?
Yes.
What does that mean?
Look, I mean, this is all speculation, right? We're in sort of uncharted territory here. But if we play this out, I mean, at the moment we have radical uncertainty about the US security guarantee. Already, even before the election of Trump, there was some degree of nervousness among US allies about the security guarantee. But now, since the election of Trump, there's radical uncertainty about it. But we're still not in a position where, you know, if the worst was to come to worst and it was actually clear that the security guarantee didn't apply anymore, that if NATO really was obsolete, as Trump suggests that it is, then what does Germany do under those circumstances? I struggle to see how Germany would then suddenly decide to develop nuclear weapons on its own. There is a debate about that. Or to spend the amount of money it would need to spend in order actually to become strategically autonomous.
All right, well, let me show our audience, too, what you wrote about nuclear weapons. We've got that quote up there as well. Maybe if we could pull that up. You say it's one of the most explosive elements that is not being talked about. You write that Germany is likely to seek to delay a more radical rethink of security policy for as long as possible, not least because it will inevitably involve the question of nuclear weapons. I mean, that's something you never hear in terms of German security policy. Are you saying that the inevitable, if we play this out with what Trump wants, that Germany has to become a nuclear power if it wants to ensure its security?
Well, I think, as I say, everyone's still hoping that actually that Trump's foreign policy is not going to be as radical as people fear. But if it does turn out to be, and my instinct is that is a possibility, then I think Germany has two options. One is a kind of a European nuclear deterrent. And, essentially, given the Brexit, the complication of Brexit essentially means, depending on the French nuclear deterrent, the force de frappe, that would raise all kinds of very, very difficult questions about what France would want in exchange for that, even if it were prepared to share its own nuclear umbrella to include Germany or the whole of the rest of the EU. That would make, for example, all of the arguments around the Eurozone would be suddenly put in a completely different context. Or the alternative would be for Germany to develop its own independent nuclear deterrent. And there have been some people since the election of Trump, like one of the publishers of the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, have called for that. Yeah. But I find that impossible to imagine, not least for economic reasons, but also just for reasons of identity. Germany conceives of itself as a Friedensmacht, a force for peace. Yeah. So then I think there is a third possibility, which is that Germany says, well, OK, look, we just won't have a nuclear umbrella. Maybe, actually, we don't really need one. Maybe we didn't need one all along. I think a lot of people in Germany will say that. We're not actually directly threatened by Russia. We don't really believe that...
But what would be the logic there? If push comes to shove, we can still call the Americans or the English or the French. They're not going to let, a Russian invasion go all the way to Cologne, Germany, for example?
Well, that I think is the sort of the earlier phase of the discussion, as it were. But if it turned out that actually the US really is pulling back in this very radical way, then I think you have to face the question of what if, as I say, if you're not prepared to get behind the French nuclear deterrent, and the Brits and the Americans are not prepared to stand behind your security, then I think...
by yourself.
Right.
I want to play for you what the German Foreign Minister, Sigmar Gabriel, what he said this week about the notion of what security is. Take a listen.
We can't get caught in an arms race. Germany has already taken on political leadership roles, economic ones. Will it really calm our neighbours if we invest 2% annually, over 60 billion euros, in arms? I'm not convinced. Germany will do more, but NATO isn't forcing us to set a 2% level. It won't in the years to come. And such a narrow view of security isn't helpful.
I mean, he's saying right there that security is about more than just weapons and soldiers.
Right. So first of all, here, we're not even talking about nuclear weapons. We're talking about conventional military capabilities. Right. But I have to say, that is such an extraordinary statement for Gabriel to make, especially on the 2% commitment. That is a commitment by NATO countries. I mean, it's not something that Germany's been forced to do. It's something that Germany's voluntarily committed to do, is to spend 2% of GDP on defence. It's true that there isn't a timescale that's been laid down, which is why in the past Germany has kind of delayed increasing defence spending and done so in a very, very incremental way. And there's been some progress in the last couple of years. And now Merkel has committed to gradually reaching that 2% target. But I think the new political reality with the election of Donald Trump as president is you have to get there much, much more quickly. And Gabrielle, but also Merkel, don't seem yet to get that.
Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting to see what happens as we get closer to the election in September as well. As we do that, we're going to call you back and have you come back on and see if the election makes a difference. Hans Kundnani, Research Fellow at the Transatlantic Academy and the German Marshall Fund. Hans, thank you very much for being on today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.